Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the fact that counting macros and counting calories are actually just a ballpark, and they're not exact, and why that's good and why that's bad. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilled up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Now, when I'm going to say this, a lot of people are going to be like, how can you say this? Are you telling people they shouldn't ever count calories or macros? No, not saying that at all. In fact, I think it can be a very valuable and very useful tool for a lot of people. Is it necessary to always regulate body weight, regulate body fat? No, but it's a valuable tool. Counting macros is a valuable tool. Counting calories is a valuable tool. They're just different tools in the toolbox, and a lot of people use them with great success. The problem is that there's also potential negatives with them when you get obsessed with them, and the reason is people are getting obsessed about things to the point sometimes where they can start to develop eating disorders, and they don't even understand that they can't even tightly control it the way that they like. So when I say that they're ballparks, what I mean is that the average person doesn't have access to enough sophisticated enough equipment or expensive enough equipment in their home to actually track this stuff super accurate. Meaning your level of accuracy, if you've got a really good digital scale, is going to be plus or minus 10%. That's if you're using a scale. That's if you're using a scale. In some cases, a volume measure might be better for certain foods. And actually, this is something I have to deal with what I'm doing here all the time, of knowing when a volume scale versus a digital scale actually does a better job for specifically what I'm doing versus speed, efficiency. Food has the same problems. Now, a lot of times people say, well, you know, you can just weigh it on a digital scale and it'll balance out, right? You'll know because the food manufacturers are allowed a margin of error legally, but, you know, that's because the weight might be off with the package they're packaging. That's not why they're allowed margin of error on the macros, on the calories, on the fat, on the protein. It has nothing to do with that. If someone has something on a scale weighed, they're not allowed to be off 20%. Something that's supposed to be 8 ounces isn't allowed to be 10 ounces or 6 ounces. Okay, it needs to be within 1 ounce. Meaning, and you'll notice some of them even listed as 8.5 ounces. Why do you think that is? Because, yeah, they're actually pretty close on that stuff. That's not the issue. The issue is that the weight isn't always indicative. So what I mean is your scale reading, if you say you're taking all your brown rice or your Pop-Tarts or your chicken or steak or whatever it is that you happen to eat, your ice cream, your scale weight isn't always reflective of the perfect macros and perfect calories because there's a moisture component. Most of the weight in any food that you have is the moisture in the water. And what I mean, let's say you take this prepackaged Pop-Tart thing and it's supposed to be exactly, I don't know, 40 grams of carbs per X amount of weight, 350 calories for X amount of weight, right? And so you weigh it to that weight. That weight assumes a standardized method of which they've weighed under a certain condition and a certain humidity in which it was sealed. What happens if you've picked up more moisture in it or it's gotten drier? Does that water have calories? Does the water and moisture have calories or carbs? Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. But it has weight. And that weight they have is going to be a normalized weight under the factory conditions in which they probably packaged it on that day. It's going to have X amount. What if they put it in a sealed container on a really humid day versus a really dry day? There might be 10% difference in the weight right there alone. So technically your 40 grams of carbs could be 36 grams of carbs. It could be 44 grams of carbs at the exact same weight. Your 350 calories could be 320, it could be 380. At the exact same weight on a digital scale, depending upon how much moisture is in it. Same thing with your rice. So that's why actually rice usually works better if it's dry rice on a volume measure rather than a scale, because the amount of moisture that it absorbs sometimes won't always plump it up as much with the small amounts with dry rice and the deviation in the air, but it could affect the weight because this stuff is very, very light. So a small shift in moisture on it will actually have a relatively large impact in scale weight. Again, easily 10%. What about your meat? All right, yeah, they weigh at when they package it up. Let's say you go to the grocery store and they have you a package that's 3.81 pounds. That's what that package of meat weighs. That's what they weighed right there. That's what they weighed right there. Now, those macros on it, the marbling and the fat and everything else can be off quite a bit. So that's easily 10% difference right there on the fat because of the fat content of the cut that you got versus the fat content of a different cut on a slightly different animal. It's going to be close, but it's not going to be perfect. And those fat calories can deviate a lot based upon just where specifically it was cut and how marbled that specific animal was versus the other one in the same stall. All right, that will affect those calories and fat. Then you've got the moisture component. It might have been 3.81 pounds when they weighed it. Then it sits on the shelf for a day. Then it sits in your refrigerator for a day. Your trip from the grocery store in your car might have been 30 minutes in the car in a slightly different environment. It lost moisture. It changes. So even with a raw measurement, the amount of water in meat and the amount of all of that in there can vary, again, easily 10%, just based upon how dry or how wet the meat actually is. How many hours ago that animal was slaughtered can impact that. What about when you cook it? Same thing. You can run into the same problems with cooked weight. How dry are you cooking it? How much of the moisture? Literally a couple of minutes difference on your well-done steak could affect the weight by 5%. With the exact same amount of calories, exact same amount of fat, exact same amount of protein. You guys see the problem here? You can't control for the amount of moisture, humidity, and water in all the foods. Even the digital scale, you might be weighing it to 0.1 grams, but you're still off 10% because of moisture difference. So you can't do that. In other words, you don't know for a fact just because you took a digital scale and weighed everything, you had zero waste, ate every last crumb, every last scrap of everything that you ate that day. And you say, okay, I'm eating 205 grams of carbs. No, you're not. You might be, but you might be eating 220. You might be eating 190. You might be eating 185. Are you probably close to 205 if you perfectly measured everything with a digital scale? Yeah. But it's not going to be exact. It's a ballpark. And when you think about the carbs, fat, protein, all that with the moisture, the calories are going to be the same thing. Your 2,500 calorie a day diet, even if it was perfectly measured, might be 2,200 calories. It might be 2,800 calories. You see how big of a gap and difference that is? So you don't know exactly how many calories you're eating. You don't know exactly how many calories you're burning. People sell devices, body bugs, and everything to tell you. No. But you know what all this stuff gives you? It gives you a ballpark. At least it puts you in the ballpark. You know that when you're consuming maybe, when you're getting roughly 2,800 calories, because that's what you've been measuring, the scale seems to drop half a pound a week for you. Or the scale goes up a fourth of a pound every week when you eat that amount of food, roughly, that ballpark. Doesn't mean that you ate 2,800 calories, but you know you're roughly in the range to slowly gain weight or slowly lose weight. It seems to be the trend when you would measure it there. And that makes it a useful tool, right? That makes it a valuable tool. Knowing approximations can get you close enough to where you can regulate changes in the scale to some degree. You have a large degree of control there. It's not exact. But that makes it a valuable tool. Of course it is. It gives you a degree of control over your intake. If you can control your intake and your output, you can control, even if they're not exact, if they're just loose and close enough, you can gain or lose weight based upon that, right? It's a valuable tool. The problem becomes when people obsess over it. There are people who literally think that their digital scale is giving them a perfect number, and they're like, my macros are 205 grams of carbs a day. That's my macros. As if there's going to be a difference if they really swapped 10% of that to something else, to protein, or if they replace a little bit of it with fat. Again, we can get into nutrient partitioning on very high carb, low fat diets. There's a case there with thermic effect, but they're still going to be relatively small. You're not going to see much difference with similar calories with different macro splits, other than maybe some transient shifts in body weight, slightly different performance, different lethargy. It's not going to be that big unless you do really big variations. So again, the people who are obsessing over the macros, they'll do that, but then people can develop like an obsession with it. And you know what? People will do it and you see it. This is exactly my macros. I hit 205.3 grams of carbs today. No, you didn't. You might as well honestly call that 200. You might as well call that 200, because that's just as likely to be within 1 gram. If you just guess 200, your 205.3 that you've carefully measured on a digital scale is easily off 10% either direction. All right, it could easily be 225. It could easily be 185. Very easily, even with a perfectly calibrated digital scale. For the reasons I said, you did not know that you ate 205.3. But when you see a person who honestly tracks their macros that close and they literally think that they know it to an exact gram or a decimal of a gram, you absolutely do not. And you're getting to a level of obsession at that point to where you're obsessing over something that you can't even measure as tightly as you think you just did. And I do see people who obsess over that, and that's where you start to see the eating disorders, because people really, they think that they need that level of control. They believe they have that level of control, and that can very quickly turn into an obsession. In other words, meticulous tracking of macros can turn into an eating disorder. Now, I do understand that there's another component to that. There are reasons some coaches, when they get people dialed in for something, will give them exact macros to the gram, and they expect you to hit close to that. Why? Because it's giving someone else control of your diet. And for some people, they need that. They need to have someone else control it for them because they can't maintain it well if they do that. It lets them not think about it and lets them focus just on the training end, the eating end, or whatever, and have someone else control the food intake, because people have psychological connections to our food. And I don't care who you are, everyone has psychological connections to food they eat. There's pleasure, there's displeasure, there's hormones related to pleasure and things in our body, in our brains, related to our food. And when we start messing with our body, oftentimes on a very large way, to very significantly change our body with our food, there can be emotional responses, emotional attachments to different foods. It can be problematic, and when you allow someone else to take control, it can detach you to some extent. All right, for some people, that is a very valuable tool. For other people, it will sabotage them. But for some people, that's a very, very valuable tool of giving someone else control of it so that their emotional component gets removed, because their emotional component, their hunger component, they'll have to step in and say, no, no, this is what I'm supposed to eat, this is what I've been assigned, no, 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 I can't deviate. I want to deviate, but I can't. I'm paying someone to tell me what to eat. I'm going to lose my investment. I'm not going to reach my goal. I have to do this. And it allows them to make that disconnect sometimes, which can be a valuable fat loss tool in and of itself. But it's more the coaching in, and it's the financial investment, and you're caught up in the investment trap, whether good or bad. Investment traps can be good, they can be bad. And then that allows that person to take control, allows you to emotionally detach from your eating more. And like I said, for some people, that's a valuable tool. But that obsession with it, when you literally think that you are perfectly tracking it to a gram, and then you do so for long periods of time, people do tend to develop eating disorders out of that. And again, a lot of it has to do with their obsessing, and sometimes can have anxiety and other problems related about hitting this stuff perfectly when they actually can't. It's not even possible to get it perfectly. It's a false sense of control in that regard, but it's still a valuable tool. It's just valuable to get you in the ballpark of moving in the right direction so that you have a degree of control over it, and you can adjust and make adjustments that at least keep you moving in the direction that you want to be moving, whether it's gaining weight, losing weight, that sort of thing. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's a valuable tool, but understand that it is just a ballpark and a tool. It's not the be-all, end-all, and it doesn't give you the degree of accuracy that you might think that it does. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.